Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my favorite books that feature vampires. Alright guys, we are almost into spooky season and that is where I thrive. I love absolutely everything about fall. It is when I get the most of my reading done because I absolutely love reading about witches, vampires, werewolf shifters, and I love to read gothic romance this time of year. So I have a lot of videos that I'm mapping out, but I was most excited about this one because I love vampires. So when I was growing up, I read Twilight in high school. I absolutely loved it. And then also the Charlaine Harris vampire mysteries that True Blood is based off of. I loved that series. So I've always had a bit of a soft spot for vampires. So I have a lot of books to cover. I tried to find a kind of different vampire rec for everyone. So I have some super spicy vampire recs, and then I have some more fantasy heavy vampire recs, then some YA. I tried to cover all bases, but I'm so excited to talk about these books with you guys. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about these vampire books. So starting off, we actually have a novella. It is Six Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is my absolute favorite novella of all time and was one of my favorite reads of last year. In the story, we are following Lilith, and Lilith is trying to save her god-cursed town from a mysterious illness. She believes that Vela, a vampire that is a little bit of a recluse who lives at the edge of town, might be the key to solving the curse. So she makes a deal with him and offers him 6 roses in exchange for 6 vials of his blood. And slowly, as they kind of work together, there is a romance that starts to blossom between them. This book is so good and does not feel like a novella at all. Not that I have anything against novellas. This just felt so fleshed out and somehow felt slow burn. I don't know how Carissa Broadbent was able to accomplish that, but I just wanted these two to get together the entire time, and it felt like it took so long, and this book is so short. But this is set in the same world as the Crown of Nyaxia series, so know that going in. I don't believe you have to read the duology before starting this. I know I still haven't read the second book, and I really enjoyed this, but honestly, everything I've read by Carissa Broadbent has been amazing. I have a lot of her books on this list, so highly, highly recommend. This is one of my absolute favorite vampire romances. And next up is a standalone. So we have Slaying the Vampire Conqueror, and this is also by Carissa Broadbent. And in this book, we are following Selena, and when she was a young girl, she actually ended up joining a cult in order to survive. So in this cult, they worship a goddess, and they have to sacrifice something, and Selena ended up sacrificing her eyes. So because of this, she isn't able to see, but she is given this gift and is able to see threads of fate, and this was such a cool and unique dynamic. But anyway, she ends up becoming a very good killer, and her cult members, or the highest up, ends up tasking her with finding this vampire conqueror, befriending him, helping him, and then murdering him, and it goes from there. And I really enjoyed this. I will say Carissa Broadbent is probably on the lower end of the spicy scale, so if you're not looking for something super spicy, but you still want a little romance in your fantasy, I feel like this is a great place to look. And I thoroughly enjoyed this book, so I hope you guys do too. And next up, we have Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. So I have to be completely honest, I read this book the week it came out, so it has been quite a while, and I forget a lot of the little intricacies of this book. However, I do remember loving the way the book was kind of formatted. It's told in a very unique way. So in this story, we're following Gabriel, and actually in this world, vampires have been attacking humanity. So there's this group known as Silver Saints that are in charge of killing these vampires. And Gabriel is one of the last Silver Saints, but he is actually imprisoned, I think at the very start of this, and he's kind of recounting his life as a vampire hunter and everything that goes along with it. And I remember there is an animal death in this, and I was so upset about it. There might be a few. I honestly don't remember very well. But I really loved the way the story was presented. I am also not the biggest fan of J. Kristoff's writing, but for some reason, It did not bug me at all in this book. I really, really enjoyed it. So I know the sequel to this book has released. I definitely have to reread this book before I dive into that sequel, but I think I'll really enjoy it. So let me know if you've read it, what you think. Was it as good as this one? But if you like a really action-packed story that is super unique, I think you'll really enjoy this. And moving on to something a little bit more spicy, we have the Blood Alliance series by Lexi C. Foss. So this actually features both shifters and vampires, so I'm going to talk about it in both rec videos, but I adore this series. It's essentially what would happen if vampires and shifters took over the world and humans were then used for breeding, food, and we're just the lower class citizens. And then while all of these books are going on, there's humans that end up in relationships with either a vampire or a shifter, or sometimes they end up turning into one or the other. And then also there's this rebel group that is slowly forming that is trying to take down like the evil people in the vampire and shifter regime. And it is so good. It is dark. I will say that. There are some books that are definitely darker than others in the series, but overall, fairly dark and definitely spicy. But all of the books are such a good time, and I love this series, and I feel like it deserves so much more hype. So most of these books are available via audio. I think it's just the last book that hasn't come out yet, and if it hasn't, I believe it is releasing soon. So highly, highly recommend. I just love this series so much. And the next 3 books are also a little bit darker and feature both vampires and witches and are by the same author. So first up we have Black Sunshine, and this is by Karina Halle, and also the sequel, The Blood is Love. So in this story, we are following Lenore, and Lenore is your typical early 20 girl living it up in a college town, and she's really close with her family. So her parents end up calling her and ask her if she wants to get away for her birthday and go to this cabin that's completely isolated. So she ends up agreeing, only to then be kidnapped by a vampire named Absalon. And Absalon informs Lenore that her parents are actually witches and they are vampire slayers, and they plan on slaying Lenore during her birthday celebration because she is actually a vampire. And the story goes from there. I will say I love this duology so much. Absalon is one of my absolute favorite vampire boyfriends. He is so controlling, but he has such a soft spot for Lenore. There's also really cool magic in this. There's these different realms, and I just thoroughly enjoyed this book. It is also pretty spicy, so know that going into it. It's definitely not the spiciest on this list, but I love Absalon and Lenore so much. And next up is Blood Orange by Karina Halle. So this is part of a duet. Unfortunately, I have not read the sequel because there is no audiobook available, but as soon as that audiobook drops, I will definitely be picking it up because the ending of Blood Orange was insane, and I need answers, and I need book 2 ASAP. But if you're unfamiliar with Blood Orange, it was super popular, I feel like last year, and it is a little bit of a Dracula reimagining. We are following Dahlia, and she is part of a witches guild and has been trained to kill vampires. So she is tasked with killing Veltu and ends up going to Venice undercover as a student of this music conservatory where Veltu is a professor. So very quickly, Dahlia ends up catching Veltu's interest, and it is their romance. Now, Dahlia doesn't realize that Veltu is harboring some secrets of his own, and there is a reincarnation trope at play, and it is just so good. Now, I will say I do prefer Black Sunshine a little bit more. However, once again, I have not read the sequel to Blood Orange, so you never know. I might end up preferring this duology a little bit more. But either way, both series are so unbelievably good and perfect if you're looking for a dark, spicy vampire read. And next up is Shadow Kissed by Rebecca L. Garcia. This is a new adult, dark paranormal romance. In this story, we are following Olivia, and after the death of her boyfriend, Olivia ends up being captured by a vampire named Sebastian. So Olivia ends up being taken to the City of Nightmares, which is a very dark and scary place where humans or mortals are considered prey. So Olivia has a tough situation in front of her. She has to either trust Sebastian and his friends, who are telling Olivia that they actually captured her for her own safety, or she can try to flee the City of Nightmares. And it goes from there. So I actually read this as part of a vlog I did with my friend Becky from Bex Reads. I'll have the vlog and her channel linked down in the description below. But it was such a fun reading vlog, and I really ended up enjoying this book, and I had never heard of it before Becky recommended it. So once again, thank you, Becky. And this was a really, really fun and fast-paced read, so highly recommend. And next up, we had Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Now, I had read a decent amount of Ali Hazelwood in the past. I normally rate her books like 3 or 4 stars. They're a fun time. They just are normally not super stand out for me. And I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about her Omegaverse book. However, this is my favorite Ali Hazelwood book by far. I absolutely loved it. So in this story, we are following Misery, and she is the daughter of one of the top vampire council members. And she is forced into an arranged marriage with Lo, who is the alpha of a werewolf clan. And in order to kind of like create peace between these two warring factions, that is why they are getting married, despite the fact that these two sides absolutely hate each other. So it is their romance, and I just absolutely loved it. I am not typically someone who loves like the arranged marriage trope. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I really, really love it if it's in like Mafia, but it's not something I normally gravitate towards. It so worked with this. I absolutely love them. And also, I think this is great for someone who's new to Omegaverse. There's a lot of like Omegaverse phrases that are kind of explained throughout this book, which I really enjoyed. So highly recommend. It has both vampires and shifters, and it just feels like a fun kind of rom-com type vampire read. And next up, we have King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett St. Clair. So in this book, we are following Isolde, and Isolde is trying to save her people. There have been vampires encroaching on her land for the last few years, and in order to stop this, she has agreed to an arranged marriage with Adrian, the king of the vampires. Now, Isolde plans on murdering her new husband on their wedding night. However, that ends up going awry, and now Isolde is stuck being married to the king of the vampires, and it's their romance. So while I did enjoy the story, I do really enjoy Scarlett St. Clair's writing. I think she does the perfect amount of spice, and her books are also very fast-paced. I do wish that there was a little bit more of a slow burn. The two main characters in this get together right away, and although they still kind of hate each other, they are having spicy time from the get, and I kind of wish it was a little bit more drawn out. Like, I really enjoyed that angst. So that was my one issue with this book, but I did really love the characters, and I think there is a sequel, if not more books out now. I read this book when it first released, so it has been years, but overall, highly recommend if you're looking for a spicy fantasy romance. And next up is yet another book by Carissa Broadbent. We have Serpent and the Wings of Night. This is the first book in the Crown of Nyaxia series. This is the only book I've read. I still haven't read Ashes and the Stark-Cursed King. I really have to do a reread of this. But in this story, we are following Oria, and she is a human girl that when she was very young, she was adopted by a vampire king who took her back and raised her as his ward. So Oria has grown up among vampires, and this has been a very dangerous existence. So when she comes of age, she asks to compete in this Kujari, and in this battle to the death, she will fight against other vampires, and if she wins, she will be granted a gift from the goddess Nyaxia. So I will say this story starts off with a bang. Like, you are just dropped into the action, and I had a really hard time putting this book down. It is just filled with these different trials. There's also a group of kind of like enemy vampires that Oria has to befriend in order to survive. Because once again, this is a battle to the death, and Oria does not have vampire powers, so it's kind of unfair. But overall, I love this book, especially the ending, and I've been meaning to read the sequel for years at this point, so I'm really hoping to get to it this fall. And next up is Embers in the Snow, and this is another standalone, which is perfect if you don't want to commit to a full series. So this story is following Finley, and at the start of this, Finley finds out that she is being forced into an arranged marriage with the eldest son of the Emperor. Now, Finley never suspected that this would be the person she married. She comes from a pretty impoverished family, so she thought she'd be marrying like a lesser lord. But instead, she has to travel through this very snowy, almost hellscape in order to get to her new husband, who is known to be cursed. And it is their romance. So I've said this in other videos, I was talking to Jen from the Book Refuge about this book, and she called it small town vampire fantasy romance. And I feel like that is the perfect description, because I will say, not a lot really happens. It is just these two people trying to, one, get to know each other and also survive some pretty horrible circumstances. And it was just a fun, easy read. It also, I think I read this in about a day and a half, and it is pretty chunky, but the pacing was just so perfectly executed. So highly recommend. I really enjoyed this. My only critique is I wish it had a little bit more action. And next up is definitely the spiciest book on this list. It is Court of the Vampire Queen by Katee Robert. So Katee Robert is known for having pretty spicy books, and this one definitely does not disappoint if that's what you're looking for. So in this story, we're following Mina, who is a half-human, half-vampire, and she really doesn't get along with her father, who is really high up. I think he's like the vampire king. And he ends up using Mina as a political pawn and gives her to Malachi, who is a pretty high up vampire. So Mina suspects that this is going to be a horrible arrangement for her, but instead ends up having a bit of a romance with Malachi and a few of his friends. And it goes from there. So I did really enjoy this. I will say the first time I picked up this book, I ended up DNFing because I wasn't expecting, it does have a bit of a wide shoes element and there's a lot going on. But the second time I picked it up, knowing fully what it was, I really had a fun time. So highly recommend if you're looking for a super spicy vampire romance. And next up, we have Blood Mercy by Vela Roth. So this is definitely different than the rest of the books on this list because in this, the vampires are almost seen as the good guys, if that makes sense. So in this story, we're following Cassia, and she is the daughter of this very evil human king, and she ends up seeking out Leo, who is a vampire, but in this book, it's called something else. It's Hesperine or Hesperine or something to that extent. And she ends up seeking him out in order to save her people, and then a forbidden love starts up between them, and the story goes from there. So I will say I did end up DNFing this book. I have a few chapters left, and it was definitely a soft DNF. I have nothing against it. It was just rather wordy and a little bit longer than at the time I just didn't have time to finish, honestly. But I do want to go back and finish this book. I've heard really good things about this series overall, and honestly, just this art is absolutely gorgeous. So I am really looking forward to picking this series up again. And this last series is a little bit of a stretch, however, it does feature vampires. They're just not called vampires. So it is From Blood and Ash. This is actually a Soul of Ash and Blood. It's a companion novel to the series. It's the first book I grabbed, but essentially everything in the From Blood and Ash series does feature vampires. So if you're unfamiliar with the story, we are following Poppy, and Poppy has grown up in isolation, preparing for her ascension, which is a secret ritual that no one knows very much about. So Poppy ends up going out in disguise one day to the Red Pearl, where she meets Hawk, who is the newest member of the Rise Guard, and they have a brief encounter. And then shortly after that, Hawk ends up becoming Poppy's personal guard, and it is their romance. So once again, this doesn't feature vampires per se, but if you're looking for the vampire vibe, highly recommend this series. It is also one of my absolute favorites. Alright guys, those are some of my favorite books that feature vampires. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the books I mentioned, or you have any really good vampire recs. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Erin, Leslie, Kat, and Lotta. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!